Previously, I mentioned that one of the things I needed to fix on my game was the layout of the slings. On Whitewood number 1, when I made the slings, I basically plopped down the stern lane guides and built the slings around them and didn't think a lot about it. However, it turns out that's not a good strategy, so I had to take some steps backwards and understand sling geometry a little bit better, and that's what I'm going to talk about in the first part of this video. So when we talk about a sling, there are a couple of key dimensions that really matter. The first of which is where the location of this bottom post of the sling is. So we have an X offset and a Y offset relative to the flipper center hole. This value affects things like post passing and trapping behavior, how easy it is to stop and hold the ball here, or even if you can or cannot post pass. The second dimensions that matter are the length of this hypotenuse of the sling, as well as the distance between these two posts, so this post and this post here. This affects the angle of the reaction of the sling, and potentially as the length of the sling gets longer, it affects the sensitivity of it. After all, the switches here are fixed, and if this gets longer and longer, there is less of the area that the ball is likely to actually hit the switch and activate it. So part of this project was inspired by a post that Apophis had made back a few months ago on the Pinball Builders Discord, where they had done an extensive project to measure several modern sterns. Here's a preview of some of the research that they did. I am leveraging this and adding a little bit onto it myself. So here are some dimensions for you. I have simplified this down to these 3 dimensions: the sling length, the sling X offset, and the Y offset of that lower post. So here are the averages. The averages on modern sterns, the ones that I measured, were 3.7 to 3.9. The X offset by Apophis's research was 0.5 to 0.8, and the Y offset, this value here, is again from Apophis's research, 2.9 to 3.2. You can see I've averaged that out basically to 3.8, 0.675, and 3.05. So if you're laying this out yourself and you want to start somewhere reasonable, probably the averages are where you can begin. I myself have used very much these almost exact averages, and I assume that my geometry will be a lot better. Now, there is something to be aware of here. This sling length ends up affecting more things than you would think. I mentioned that it can affect the ball hitting the switches. It also affects the angle that the ball bounces out this way. One of the things that I didn't realize that it affects until I started laying things out is it affects the length of the lanes here. So this blue value, right? As this gets longer and shorter, then it will shorten this down. Now, one thing I should mention is this value here, this 3.7 to 3.9, that is coming exclusively off of Elwin modern sterns. There is a DXF file that's floating around the internet, and I think that that's around 4.25. This length here is about 4.25. So that geometry is probably what you will need if you want to use the standard stern insert. And what I mean by that, this lane guide here, there are a number of companies online that sell this guide, and this length is fixed. And if you want to use this lane guide, you're probably going to need to go a little bit longer, like 4.25. Now, just to give evidence for what I'm saying, here you can see this sling length, I want to say it's 3.75. And you can see that in doing that, in order to get this top post to align with the post that is on the top of the lanes, this lane guide becomes too small, right? So this is another factor as well, is the length of the sling here will affect the length of the lane. There are some downsides to using shorter lane lengths. One of the upsides, of course, is that you can make smaller slings. You can use less space for the lower thirds. But one of the downsides is that the ball is much more likely to come and jump out this way, which pinball players often refer to as shatzing. So the shorter that you make this, the more likely your game will be to shatz and annoy the players. Now, of course, all things in balance, there are some games that this makes sense for and some games that it doesn't, so that's up to you to decide. But knowing the geometry and knowing the choice is part of that battle. Now, if you don't believe me, if you think that I just measured this all out and it's all done in CAD, here's a video of me holding up the lane guide over top of Godzilla, and you can see that, in fact, yeah, it's longer than it seems. In working on the geometry for the slings down here, I just started thinking about what is it that is really going to take to push this game to the next level. Really, I started with two problems to fix. Number one, the sling geometry is bad. And number two, I'm going to need to do something about the bank of air balls. So in working through that, here is a design that I came up with, and let me just walk you through some of the features. So on the left here, we have a pretty standard in-lane and out-lane. I am considering changing this to have a target right here, but TBD. And then on the right, we have something that probably hasn't been seen since the 70s. So tables like Gottlieb Atlantis had this really neat like multiple lane rollover thing going on. And part of the game was hitting those switches and kind of testing your nudging ability. And I thought, well, that would be really cool to have on a modern game. What if each of these switches had an indicator on them? Sort of like how lanes typically have indicators. And you had to roll over all 5 of them. You couldn't use the flippers to move them around. Maybe you can. I don't know. I'm still figuring some of this out. But what if you couldn't use the flippers to move around them? This switch right here would present a problem because then you'd effectively have to drain. And so I thought, well, what if you had to go over this switch, but what if there was a mechanism that, here you can see that this is actually a coil with a pop-up post. And what if that would come up and then it would save your ball? But maybe you would only get that ability if like you had gotten the other lights, or maybe that's a perk that you unlock during gameplay, is that you're allowed to lift that up. I don't know. I think that there's some possibilities there that are potentially interesting. Of course, that's one of those things that you have to explore. Anyways, as a result, you can see I kind of did this Jaws King Kong thing where there's a one-way gate going from the out lane to the in lane. This would be facilitated by this pop-up post. This is also a little similar to Stern Foo Fighters. The overdrive save has a post right here that pops the ball up onto the flipper, which is one of the coolest things if you've never seen it. This also has a little bit of that energy as well. All right, so the drop targets that were right here, those have now moved over here on the left. And to make it a little bit more challenging, I put a pop bumper right above them, because why would you have a pop bumper right above the drop targets? So once these drops are down and you're hitting the targets behind them, I think that this is going to be an area that's a little bit risky because you're liable to hit that pop. However, that should play into this like skill nudge area over here on the right, because I'm thinking that this pop bumper will have some potential to send the ball maybe flinging over here somewhere. I may end up having to adjust the entry gaps on these. Really, it's so hard to know this just looking at CAD, so I'm probably going to have to build it in C. Anyways, I think that this ends up being a neat area because I kept all 5 drops, but now they're spread out a little bit, and I don't have to worry about, hopefully, don't have to worry about air balls as much. Now, in moving the drop target bank, previously that had targets behind it, and so that allowed me to slide the pop bumper over. So that probably will need a little bit of adjustment, but I think I'm pretty happy with how this is shaping up. A couple of things that I did add in as well is behind these 2 drop targets, instead of just having a stand-up target, there's now a captive ball. So this ball would be captive and anchored below the table, which I believe formally is known as a Newton ball. When you strike this ball, it transfers the energy to the ball behind it. So that one right there. And then it can roll up and it can hit that target if you hit it hard enough. There is also a sling here out of its normal position coming down this right out lane. And I did this for a couple of reasons. One is I don't have a pop cluster on this table, and so I thought maybe we could get a little bit of that kind of bouncing back and forth action potentially. Another idea that I had, you can see there's a switch hole here. I don't know if that will be the final destination for it, but as the ball is coming around, you can see I've got a second one up here to kind of detect what's happening. As the ball is coming around, I technically could, with software, manually open up the sling so that it's sticking out and then the ball will hit it and bounce into the pop. So there may be some game modes where that makes sense for. I don't know. Again, that's one of those things that you just got to build it and try it and see how it feels. All right, a couple of other things here. There's a scoop, and I'll talk about this a little bit. Right now, this scoop goes down into a mini subway, and you can see that I've got it set up to pop out over here, but there's nothing there. I'll talk about that in a second. Moving along the table, we've got this interesting shot. This was inspired by Deadpool Snick shot. And if I rotate the game over here a little bit, you can see that the angle of this target there in orange is just enough that if you hit with the upper flipper early to make this inner orbit shot, you will very likely clip the edge of this target as the ball goes around. I am always a sucker for that, like, can you hit a target on the way to something else? I think that those are so fun. It only happens every now and then, and it feels really good when it does, so I included that. The upper flipper, the two main shots, of course, are the scoop and this inner orbit into the spinner, but that's a nice, like, can you hit that as well? Maybe there will be a mode where you have to hit the pop bumper too. I don't know. I know not everybody likes hitting balls into pop bumpers. We've got a center ramp, which right now just brings you up and over. I think that needs to be a little bit more exciting. And I've got this kind of Heart of the Grove area in the back going on here. This uses another one of those pop-up posts. And the idea is that you can get your ball stuck in here, and then maybe you have to hit your ball again to make it hit this target in the back in order to get it released. You notice that there's two balls here. I'm going to come back to that. You're noticing a theme, the missing up post and the two balls. Completing out the layout here on the left, we've got a pretty standard ramp that reverses back on itself, as well as this tree with a spinner inside. Okay, now the part that I am still trying to figure out is that over here on the top right, something really cool needs to happen. And I'm not sure what that is. One of the ideas that I was playing around with is to have an upper playfield. Upper playfields present some challenges because, first of all, you've gotten to look at this layout so far. By the way, I'm actually looking for something over here that I don't think is in the list. The challenge with upper layouts is that they block visibility. Right. So in this case, here's kind of about the view of what it would look like playing. And you can see that I've got this cutout here, and I was thinking maybe there's an upper playfield, and then you cut out a section of it that has plexiglass inset, and so you can feel through it. Maybe that's good. I've got a mech right there for the upper flipper. I left that in. Maybe there's an upper flipper, and you can hit a loop shot. And the way that you get to this is that you go in the scoop, and then it pops around the back, and then it lands up here. Another thing that could happen here is then when the ball falls out of the upper playfield, it could fall into this other wire form here. So this wire form right here, it could fall into that wire form. That might be cool. It might also slow down the game, and it might block visibility, and it might make this feel a little bit more clustered. Yeah, so I don't know. That's a thing that I'm still figuring out. The other thing which you caught, I mentioned that not only do I not have the place where the ball pops up, but you notice I had put two balls in here. And I was thinking, well, if you can get your ball stuck in here, then what if there was a way to get multiple balls stuck in here? And that would be like a way to start multi-ball, for example. So another idea that I've had is that instead of having an upper playfield, what if the ball comes out and then it goes through some kind of cool mechanical device, something like a Rube Goldberg light type of thing, and that causes it to fall in this area. That could happen with the upper playfield, right? Like there could be a shot here on the upper playfield where you actually hit across the upper playfield, and then maybe you go in a scoop and the upper playfield drops your ball into there. Or maybe it's just once the ball goes into this scoop right here, it comes out and falls in there. I don't know. So those are some of the things that I'm still figuring out. I think I'm getting pretty close here to being able to commit to a Whitewood number 2. However, this is introducing some new challenges for me. So number 1, I'm going to need to fabricate custom in and out lane guides. I've been looking at send, cut, send in order to do that. Number 2, I'm going to need to fabricate custom wire forms, and that's going to be a challenge. So that's something I need to figure out how to source. This design is also calling for custom ramps. Another thing I'm going to have to figure out. Of course, I have ideas on how I'm going to do these things, but until I've done it, I don't know if it's going to work. And then the last thing, which isn't illustrated, is I'm going to need to figure out inserts. Now, up to this point, that was something that wasn't on my radar, but in working on Whitewood 2, I thought maybe I should start to think about inserts. If nothing else, it will give me practice. I'm hitting the YouTube maximum of 15 minutes per video. So for now, that's it. Hopefully next time I've got some more interesting stuff to share. Thanks for keeping up.